Commander Zana of the Tikor Empire sat rigid in her command chair, her sharp, violet eyes fixed on the data scrolling across the ship's holographic display. The Tikor were a race of highly intelligent and proud beings, their technology surpassing many others in the galaxy. Zana had been dispatched on an urgent mission to resolve a critical malfunction aboard their most advanced warship, the Vortex Reaver. However, the anomaly that plagued the ship's core systems had baffled even the greatest minds in her fleet. "Have you recalibrated the energy matrix?" Zana asked, her voice cold and precise, addressing her chief engineer, Orin. "Yes, Commander, multiple times. The issue persists. The system should be functioning perfectly, but it keeps destabilizing," Orin replied, his frustration barely concealed. Zana narrowed her eyes in thought. The Tikor were not accustomed to failure. Their empire had flourished by conquering other civilizations and mastering the technology they encountered. Yet here they were, stuck in the middle of space with no explanation for the breakdown of their ship's most vital system. Behind her, an unassuming figure stood quietly, observing the situation with a calm that seemed out of place among the tense Tikor crew. His name was Jack Reynolds, a human mechanic brought on board as a last-minute replacement after the sudden departure of one of the lower-ranking engineers. Humans were generally seen as primitive and inferior by the Tikor, and Zana had barely acknowledged his presence since his arrival. Zana sighed, standing up from her command chair, her tall and lithe form cutting an imposing figure. "We need to solve this now. We are in a contested sector, and we cannot afford to be stranded without our warp core. We might as well paint a target on our hull for any hostile ships passing by." Orin opened his mouth to respond, but Jack spoke first. "Commander, if I may." Zana turned to the human with a raised eyebrow. Jack's calm demeanor irritated her. She was in no mood for suggestions from someone of such a lowly species. "What is it, human?" Zana asked, her tone dismissive. Jack, undeterred, stepped forward. "I've been watching the data, and I think the problem isn't with the core itself, but with the way the power is being distributed. The T-core systems rely on absolute precision, right? But this type of anomaly feels like it's more organic, like something's interfering with the natural flow of energy." Zana blinked, surprised by the insight. "Organic interference? That's absurd. Our systems are perfect. Nothing organic could cause this." Jack shrugged, his face betraying no emotion. "Sometimes perfection leaves no room for flexibility. Maybe it's not about brute force but about listening to the system." Orin snorted in disbelief. What would a human know about listening to systems? "Our technology is far beyond anything your kind has ever seen." Jack simply walked to the console, his fingers moving across the controls with surprising ease. He began running diagnostics, not on the core itself, but on the peripheral systems that connected to it. Zana watched, intrigued despite herself. She had never expected much from the human, but something about his confidence gave her pause. As Jack worked, the ship's hum grew steadier. The chaotic energy fluctuations that had plagued the vessel began to stabilize. Zana's eyes widened in shock. "How did you?" Zana began, but Jack interrupted gently. "Sometimes you just need to listen. Systems don't always respond to force. They tell you what's wrong if you're willing to pay attention." Zana stared at him, her mind racing. A human had just solved a problem that had stumped her best engineers. She was torn between disbelief and the nagging realization that she might have underestimated this species. Orin, still skeptical, scowled. "That was just luck. There's no way he actually understands our systems." Jack smiled slightly. "Maybe, but luck doesn't explain everything. The system was overloaded because it was being pushed too hard. You built it to be perfect, but perfection doesn't leave room for error. That's where things break." Zana stepped closer to the human, studying him. "You think you know more than us, human." "No," Jack replied, "but I know that even the best systems need to be flexible. Machines are designed by people, and people aren't perfect." Zana's mind was reeling. For as long as she had known, humans were considered inferior, good only for manual labor or the simplest tasks. Yet here was one standing before her, not only solving a problem her engineers couldn't but also offering insight into the very nature of their technology. Could it be that humans were more than the galaxy gave them credit for? Back in the command center, Zana was still trying to process what had happened. Jack had not only solved the anomaly, but had also done it with an ease that made her question everything she had been taught about humans. As a commander in the Tikor Empire, she had always been taught that her people were superior, stronger, smarter, and more advanced than any other species in the galaxy. How could a human, of all beings, figure out something that had stumped her finest minds? The room was quiet, the crew exchanging uneasy glances. They had seen what Zana had: Jack's calm confidence, his ability to read their technology like it was second nature. It was unsettling, to say the least. Before Zana could ask Jack anything further, her communicator buzzed. "Commander Zana," a voice crackled through. "The warp core is showing signs of instability again. We may need to eject it if the situation worsens." Zana cursed under her breath. If they lost the warp core, they would be stranded in enemy territory. The consequences would be catastrophic. She glanced at Jack, who was watching her expectantly. "Do you think you can help us again?" she asked reluctantly. Jack nodded. "I'll do what I can." Together, they headed to the engine room, where the core hummed with ominous energy. The lead engineer, a burly Tikor named Varek, stood by the control panel, his eyes narrowing at Jack's approach. "This human again," Varek growled. "Commander, this is a matter for Tikor expertise." Zana hesitated but eventually nodded toward Jack. "Let him work." Jack approached the core, his hands moving swiftly across the controls. As he ran diagnostics, his brow furrowed. "It's not the core," Jack said, his voice steady. "It's the coolant system. It's out of sync." Varek scoffed. "Impossible. We've run every diagnostic. There's no error." Jack shook his head. "The system isn't responding fast enough to the changes in the core's energy output. It looks fine on the surface, but the delay is causing a buildup of pressure." Zana's heart raced. Could it really be that simple? Could a human once again hold the key to solving the Tikor Empire's most advanced problems? The engine room thrummed with the ominous sound of the unstable warp core, casting an eerie glow over the faces of the Tikor crew. Jack stood before the controls, his eyes focused, analyzing the data with a calm determination that contrasted sharply with the tension in the room. Zana felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Their ship was teetering on the edge of disaster, and every second they delayed could be the difference between survival and annihilation. "We don't have much time," Zana said, her voice sharper than she intended. "If this doesn't work, we'll have no choice but to eject the core." Jack nodded, his fingers flying over the control panel. "I'm aware. Think I can sync the coolant system manually, but it's going to take a minute." "A minute we don't have," Varek muttered under his breath, his skepticism toward Jack still evident. The tension between the human and the Tikor engineer was palpable, but Jack paid it no mind. He was focused entirely on the task at hand. The ship shuddered as another energy spike rippled through the core. The entire room flickered, the lights dimming for a brief second before stabilizing again. Zana's heart raced. They couldn't afford many more of those spikes. "Hurry, human," Varek growled, his eyes fixed on the readouts. "I'm going as fast as I can," Jack replied, his tone remarkably calm considering the gravity of the situation. As the seconds ticked by, Zana found herself watching Jack more closely. His hands moved with an effortless precision, adjusting controls that even her most experienced engineers struggled with. His face remained impassive, but she could see the gears turning in his mind, processing the complex data with an intuitive understanding that both fascinated and unsettled her. Zana had always believed that humans were a simple species, their technology crude compared to the advanced systems of the Tikor. But now, watching Jack, she began to question that assumption. Could it be that humans possessed a different kind of intelligence? One that the T-Core had overlooked. Another spike rocked the ship, this one more violent than the last. Alarms blared as the core's energy levels fluctuated dangerously. "We're running out of time," Varric shouted, his eyes wide with panic. "Got it," Jack said suddenly, his voice cutting through the chaos. Zana's breath caught in her throat as she watched Jack make a final adjustment to the coolant system. For a brief moment, the ship seemed to hold its breath. Then, slowly, the warp core's erratic energy levels began to stabilize. The alarms silenced, and the ship's violent shuddering ceased. Zana exhaled a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. The tension in the room evaporated, replaced by a stunned silence as the crew processed what had just happened. "You did it," Zana said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack stepped back from the control panel, wiping a sheen of sweat from his forehead. "Just needed to listen to what the system was trying to tell us." Varric stood frozen, disbelief etched on his face. Impossible. How could a human? Zana turned to Varric, her tone sharp. "He just saved this ship. Varric, show some respect." Varric muttered something under his breath, but said no more. Jack, for his part, seemed unaffected by the tension in the room. He simply nodded at Zana and stepped away from the console, as if solving a life-threatening crisis aboard an alien warship was just another day on the job. Zana, however, was far from unaffected. She couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. How this human had outmaneuvered her best engineers. How he had saved her ship with nothing more than intuition and quick thinking. "There's something more to you," Zana said, studying Jack with newfound curiosity. "Humans, they're not what we thought." Jack shrugged. "We're just people, Commander. We learn, we adapt. That's what we do." Zana frowned, her mind racing with questions. Humans had always been dismissed by the galaxy's more advanced species. They were seen as primitive, a race barely able to leave their own planet. But what if they had been wrong? What if humanity's simplicity was not a weakness, but a strength? Before she could ponder the thought further, her communicator buzzed again. "Commander." A voice crackled over the speaker. "Hostile ships detected on the long-range scanners. We're not alone out here." Zana's stomach dropped. Of course, they were in contested space, and it was only a matter of time before someone noticed their vulnerable position. Now, with the warp core stabilized, but still fragile, they were sitting ducks. "How many ships?" Zana asked, her voice regaining its usual authority. "2, maybe 3. Unidentified signatures. Prepare for battle," Zana ordered, her heart pounding. "But keep the warp core on standby. We may need to make a quick escape." She turned to Jack, who was watching her carefully. "Can we rely on the core if things go south?" Jack hesitated for a moment before nodding. "It should hold, but we'll need to be careful. Push it too hard, and we could be back where we started." Zana clenched her fists, her mind racing with calculations. They couldn't afford to get into a prolonged battle, not with their systems still fragile. But retreating wasn't an option either, not yet. "Then we'll fight smart," she said, her voice steely. "And if we need to run, we'll run." Jack nodded, his face calm but his eyes sharp. "Sounds like a plan." As the ship's systems powered up for battle, Zana felt a strange sense of hope. They had been in a desperate situation before, and against all odds, this human had saved them. Maybe, just maybe, they could pull through this too. With the threat of hostile ships looming closer, the crew of the Vortex Reaver scrambled into action, preparing for battle. The atmosphere on the bridge was tense, but there was also an undercurrent of determination. They had survived the warp core crisis, and now they were ready to face whatever came next. "Shields at full power," Orin reported, his hands moving rapidly over the controls. "Ready all weapons," Zana commanded, her voice calm and controlled, though her mind was racing. She could see the enemy ships approaching on the tactical display. dark, menacing blips moving with purpose toward the Vortex Reaver. Each second that passed brought them closer to a confrontation that Zana knew they couldn't afford, not with their systems still vulnerable. Orin, her tactical officer, worked quickly, his hands flying over the console. "Weapons online, Commander. All batteries ready to fire on your command." The bridge was silent, save for the low hum of the ship's systems and the steady beep of the tactical display, tracking the incoming hostiles. Zana felt the weight of her crew's eyes on her. They trusted her to make the right decisions, to lead them through this crisis. But deep down, she wasn't sure if they were ready. The warp core was still fragile, and while Jack's quick thinking had bought them time, any miscalculation could send them spiraling back into chaos. "Any identification on those ships?" Zana asked, her eyes narrowing at the display. Orin shook his head. "None, Commander. Their transponders are offline. They don't want us to know who they are." Zana's gut tightened. That meant one thing: pirates. This far out in contested space, unmarked ships usually belong to marauders looking to plunder weakened vessels. The Vortex Reaver, with its damaged systems, would be an easy target. "How long until they're in range?" Zana asked. 2 minutes, maybe less." Zana glanced at Jack, who was standing at the back of the bridge, watching the proceedings with the same calm, steady gaze that had saved them in the engine room. He caught her eye and gave a small nod, as if to say, "We've got this." But Zana wasn't so sure. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," she ordered. "We can't afford to take direct hits." "Commander," Orin interrupted, his voice tense. "If we don't engage them head-on, they'll pin us down. They've got the advantage in speed." Zana cursed under her breath. He was right. The Vortex Reaver was a battleship, built for long-range engagements, but with their warp core barely functioning, they couldn't rely on their speed to outmaneuver the pirates. "Options," she demanded, her mind racing. Orin hesitated for a moment. "We could use the asteroids." Zana glanced at the navigation display. There was a dense asteroid field a few clicks ahead. It wasn't an ideal option, but it might give them the cover they needed to level the playing field. "Set a course for the asteroid field," she ordered. "We'll use it to our advantage. Weapons hot, but don't fire until I give the order." "Aye, Commander," Orin replied, punching in the coordinates. The ship lurched as it adjusted course, heading straight for the asteroid field. The enemy ships followed, closing the distance quickly. "They're still gaining on us," Orin said, his voice tight with tension. "We'll be in weapons range in 30 seconds. Zana clenched her fists. The odds were stacked against them, but they had to hold their ground. "All hands, brace for impact. This is going to get rough." The crew moved into action, securing themselves at their stations. The tension on the bridge was palpable, every eye fixed on the tactical display as the enemy ships closed in. "Commander, they're powering up weapons," Orin warned. "Incoming fire." Zana's heart pounded in her chest. "Activate evasive maneuvers. Now." The Vortex Reaver swerved hard to the left, dodging the first volley of plasma fire from the enemy ships. Explosions lit up the space around them as the plasma rounds detonated against the ship's shields. The bridge rocked violently, and Zana gripped the armrests of her command chair to steady herself. "Shields holding," Orin reported, though his voice was strained, "but they won't last long under this kind of fire." Zana gritted her teeth. "We just need to reach that asteroid field." "How much longer?" 30 seconds, Orin replied. "We're almost there." Another barrage of plasma fire slammed into the shields, and this time, the lights flickered as the ship's systems struggled to compensate. Zana could feel the ship groaning under the strain, and she knew they were running out of time. "Return fire," she ordered. "Give them something to think about." Orin tapped the controls, and the Vortex Reaver's forward batteries opened up, sending a salvo of high-energy plasma rounds toward the nearest enemy ship. The rounds connected, and one of the pirate vessels lurched to the side as its shields buckled under the assault. "They're hit, but still coming," Orin reported. Zana didn't reply. Her eyes were fixed on the asteroid field, now looming large on the main display. They were seconds away from entering the dense cloud of space debris, where their larger ship would have a chance to hide and maneuver. "Entering the asteroid field in 3, 2, 1, Orin announced. The ship shuddered as they passed into the asteroid field, massive chunks of rock drifting lazily through the void. The enemy ships hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to follow them into the treacherous terrain. "Hold course," Zana said, her eyes sharp. "Keep us in the densest part of the field. We'll use the asteroids for cover." Orin complied, guiding the ship deeper into the field. The enemy ships followed, but more cautiously now, their movements slower and more deliberate as they navigated the hazardous environment. "We've bought ourselves some time," Jack said, stepping up to the command console, "but it won't last long. They'll adapt." Zana nodded, her mind already racing ahead to the next move. "We need to disable at least one of those ships. If we can take out their lead vessel, the others might retreat." Jack glanced at the tactical display. "The lead ship's shields are weak. If we time it right, we can use one of these asteroids as a weapon." Zana's eyes narrowed. "You're suggesting we slingshot an asteroid into them?" Jack nodded. "It's risky, but it might be our best shot." Zana considered it for a moment. It was a bold move, but one that could turn the tide in their favor. And right now, bold was all they had. "Do it," she ordered. "Orin, calculate a trajectory and get us in position." Orin's fingers flew over the controls, plotting a course that would use the ship's gravitational thrusters to send a nearby asteroid hurtling toward the enemy. Zana watched as the massive rock began to move, slowly at first, but gaining speed as it was pulled along the calculated path. The enemy ships were closing in again, their weapons primed to fire. Zana held her breath as the asteroid barreled toward the lead vessel. "Impact in 5 seconds," Orin said, his voice tense. 4, 3, 2. The asteroid slammed into the lead pirate ship, crushing its shields and tearing through the hull. The ship erupted in a massive fireball, debris scattering in all directions. The remaining enemy ships hesitated, their advance faltering. "They're retreating," Orin reported, his voice filled with relief. "We did it." Zana exhaled slowly, her heart still racing. They had survived. For now. The bridge of the Vortex Reaver was momentarily still, the crew catching their breath after the intense battle. The enemy ships had retreated, disappearing into the depths of space, like vultures leaving behind the wounded. For now, they were safe, but Zana knew this was only a brief reprieve. The damage to the ship was extensive, and they were still deep in contested space. Orin broke the silence. "Shields at 40%. Weapons systems offline for now, but we can manage repairs." "Good," Zana replied, though her mind was elsewhere. Something didn't add up. Pirates usually weren't this organized, and they didn't often retreat so easily unless they had a reason. She turned to Jack, who had been quietly observing from the back of the bridge. He had an uncanny ability to see things others missed, and she wanted his opinion. "What do you think, Jack?" That retreat seemed too convenient. Jack crossed his arms, his brow furrowed in thought. "Yeah, I've been thinking the same thing. Pirates don't just give up after one hit. They were after something, and I don't think they were expecting us to fight back as hard as we did." Zana nodded. Or maybe they got what they came for. Before they could speculate further, the comms officer spoke up, his voice edged with surprise. "Commander, we're receiving a signal. It's faint, but I think it's a distress call." Zana straightened in her seat. "From where?" The officer tapped a few buttons on his console. "It's coming from the asteroid field. It's heavily encrypted, but I'm picking up a human signature." "Human?" Zana frowned. There shouldn't have been any other human ships this deep into disputed space. "Can you trace the signal?" "I'm trying, but it's weak. The interference from the asteroids isn't helping, but I think I can get a lock on it. Xana exchanged a glance with Jack. He raised an eyebrow, clearly just as intrigued as she was. A human distress signal in contested space. That's not a coincidence, Jack said. Agreed, Xana replied. Get a location on that signal. If someone's out there, we need to know who and why. After a few tense moments, the comms officer looked up. Got it. It's coming from a small vessel embedded in one of the larger asteroids. No life support on board, but there's definitely a human signature. Xana stood. We're going to investigate. Jack, I want you on a landing team. Orin, you're in charge while I'm gone. The team moved quickly, assembling in the hangar bay. Xana, Jack, and a small group of tactical officers boarded a shuttle and made their way toward the coordinates of the distress signal. As they approached the massive asteroid, the signal became clearer, though the encryption remained a mystery. This is strange, Jack muttered, his eyes scanning the readings. The signal's automated, but someone set it up to broadcast specifically to human frequencies. Xana, seated beside him, nodded thoughtfully. That means whoever set it up knew humans would be in the area. But how? There are no human colonies or bases this far out. The shuttle landed gently on the asteroid's surface, its thrusters kicking up a cloud of dust in the low gravity. The team disembarked and moved cautiously toward the source of the signal. It was coming from a small, unmarked ship that had clearly been here for some time. The hull was pockmarked with impacts from debris, and its systems appeared to be long offline. Doesn't look like much, one of the tactical officers muttered, scanning the area with his weapon raised. Jack approached the ship's hatch, his brow furrowed in concentration. No external damage that would suggest it was attacked. This ship's been here for a while. Xana joined him, her hand resting on her sidearm as she scanned the desolate surroundings. Can you get it open? Jack knelt beside the hatch, pulling a small device from his tool belt. I'll give it a try. He worked quickly, bypassing the ship's primitive security systems with ease. After a few moments, there was a hiss of decompressing air as the hatch slid open. Inside, the ship was cramped and utilitarian, clearly designed for short-range missions. Xana's eyes immediately fell on the cockpit, where the faint glow of a distress beacon pulsed steadily. Jack moved to the console, his hands gliding over the controls. Looks like this ship's been out of commission for a while, Jack muttered. But there's something else. He tapped a few buttons, and a holographic display flickered to life. It showed a series of coordinates that led deeper into disputed space. Xana leaned over his shoulder, her eyes narrowing. Those coordinates, what are they? Jack shook his head. Not sure, but they're marked with an encryption key I haven't seen before. Whatever this is, it's important. Suddenly, the ship's system sputtered to life, and a garbled voice crackled over the speakers. If you're hearing this message, you're not alone. We are not your enemy. Follow the coordinates. Time is running out. The message repeated twice before fading into static. Xana and Jack exchanged a glance, the same question on both their minds. Who was behind this message, and what did they want? Before they could process the implications, the tactical officer standing guard at the entrance shouted, "Commander, we've got company." Xana spun on her heel, her hand going to her sidearm. In the distance, she saw movement, a shadowy figure approaching from the far side of the asteroid. The figure was tall, humanoid, but its movements were too fluid, too graceful to be human. "Get ready," Xana ordered, her pulse quickening. She had no idea who or what was coming, but she wasn't about to take any chances. The figure stepped into the light, and Xana's breath caught in her throat. It was an alien, but unlike any she had ever seen. Its skin was a pale, iridescent blue, and its eyes glowed with a strange, otherworldly intelligence. "I mean you no harm," the alien said, its voice calm but urgent. "I am a friend. If you wish to survive what's coming, you'll need to trust me." Xana's grip tightened on her weapon, but something in the alien's demeanor gave her pause. This creature, whatever it was, seemed genuinely concerned. And after everything they had been through, Zana wasn't in a position to turn away potential allies. "Who are you?" she demanded. The alien's glowing eyes flickered. "I am a refugee from the same enemy that now hunts you." Xana's heart skipped a beat. What enemy? The alien glanced at the sky, where distant stars twinkled ominously. "The same one that sent those ships after you. The same one that's been watching you since you arrived." Jack stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "What do they want?" The alien's gaze met his. "To eliminate you and anyone who stands in their way." Xana's heart pounded as the alien's words sank in. The enemy had been watching them, tracking their every move. But why? What did they want from humans, and why was this mysterious figure offering to help? "We don't have time for games," Xana said firmly, her hand still resting on her sidearm. "If you want to help us, start talking. Who is this enemy, and what do they want?" The alien looked at her with a calm intensity. "They are known as the Syndral Collective, a vast empire of conquerors who feed on technological advancement and biological superiority. They've been watching humanity's progress for years, waiting for the right moment to strike." "The Syndral Collective," Jack muttered under his breath, processing the information. He glanced at Zana. "I've heard rumors, but I didn't think they were real. Most alien races don't even speak of them. They prefer to remain in the shadows until the time is right." The alien continued. "And now, with your ship damaged and stranded in contested space, they believe that time has come. They see humanity as a potential threat, a species that could rival their control of the galaxy." Xana's pulse quickened. "So they sent those ships to destroy us." "Not just destroy," the alien corrected. "They want to study you. Humans have something the Syndral Collective fears: ingenuity. Your species adapts in ways they don't understand. That scares them." Jack's eyes widened slightly. "That's why they retreated earlier. They weren't just testing our defenses, they were testing us." Xana stepped forward, her voice sharp. "And you? Why are you helping us?" The alien's expression softened, almost sorrowful. "Because I am one of many who escaped their control. My people were once like yours, free, innovative, creative. But the Syndral Collective took everything from us. They enslaved our minds, erased our history. I cannot let that happen to another species." Xana felt a knot form in her stomach. The stakes were higher than she'd imagined. This wasn't just about surviving an attack. It was about protecting humanity from a force that could wipe them out. "All right," Xana said, her decision made. "If you're telling the truth, we need to act fast. What's the plan?" The alien gestured to the holographic display still glowing in the cockpit. "Those coordinates lead to a hidden base, a remnant of my people's resistance. It holds technology powerful enough to give you an edge over the Syndral Collective. But it won't be easy. They know you found the signal, and they'll stop at nothing to keep you from reaching the base." Jack looked at Zana, then back at the alien. "How do we know we can trust you?" The alien held Jack's gaze. "You don't. But what choice do you have?" Xana clenched her jaw, weighing the options. Every instinct told her not to trust this alien, but she knew they had no other way out. If this was their only shot at survival, she had to take it. "We'll follow the coordinates," Xana said finally. "But if this is a trap, you won't live to see the outcome." The alien gave a small, understanding nod. "Fair enough." With the plan set, Zana and her team returned to the shuttle, the alien following closely behind. As they flew back to the Vortex Reaver, Zana couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. They were about to dive deeper into contested space, into the unknown, guided by a mysterious ally they barely understood. As the shuttle touched down in the hangar, Oren was there to greet them, his expression a mix of relief and confusion when he saw the alien step off the ramp. "Commander, what?" "I'll explain later," Zana interrupted. Right now, we need to get the ship moving. We have coordinates to follow, and we're on borrowed time. Orin nodded, though his eyes lingered suspiciously on the alien. Understood. We've managed to get the engines back online, but the damage is still severe. We won't be able to withstand another full-scale attack. We won't need to, Zana said, though she wasn't entirely sure of that herself. We just need to reach that base. As the crew scrambled to prepare the ship, Zana pulled Jack aside. What do you think? Can we trust this alien? Jack ran a hand through his hair, his face thoughtful. Honestly, I don't know, but everything we've seen so far lines up. The Syndral Collective is real, and if they're watching us, we can't just sit here and wait to die. Zana sighed. Agreed. Let's hope this gamble pays off. The Vortex Reaver roared to life, engines humming as the ship pulled away from the asteroid. The alien stood quietly near the viewport, watching as the stars stretched into streaks of light. We're being followed, the alien said suddenly, his voice calm but serious. Zana turned sharply. How do you know? The alien pointed to a distant shadow in the viewport. The Syndral ships that won't stop until they destroy you or capture you. Jack swore under his breath. How long until they catch up? The alien's glowing eyes dimmed slightly. Not long. You need to reach the base before they do. Zana's mind raced. If they didn't make it to the base, humanity could lose its chance to fight back. Push the engines to their limits, she ordered. We can't afford to slow down. The ship surged forward, its damaged hull creaking under the strain. The crew worked frantically, monitoring the Syndral ships on their sensors, hoping against hope that they could outrun them. As they approached the coordinates, a massive structure emerged from the shadows of a barren moon. It was unlike anything Zana had ever seen, ancient, towering, and clearly built with technology far beyond anything humanity or the Syndral Collective possessed. There it is, the alien said softly, the last refuge of my people. Zana stared in awe. Get us inside. Now. The Vortex Reaver descended toward the base, but the Syndral ships were closing in fast. Alarms blared as their pursuers opened fire, laser blasts slamming into the rear shields. We won't make it, Orin shouted, struggling to keep the ship steady. Zana gritted her teeth. We have to. Just as the Syndral ships were about to overtake them, the ancient base responded. Massive energy fields flared to life, shielding the Vortex Reaver and driving back the enemy. We're in, Jack yelled, his voice triumphant. The ship landed inside the protective dome of the base, safe, for now. The alien turned to Zana, his expression serious. You made it, but the Syndral Collective will not stop. They know you found this place, and they will come with everything they have. Zana nodded, her resolve hardening. Then we'll be ready. Whatever it takes, we'll make sure humanity survives. Inside the ancient base, the crew of the Vortex Reaver worked tirelessly to prepare for the inevitable battle. The technology within the base was advanced, but much of it had been dormant for centuries. They needed time to activate the systems and harness the power hidden within. Zana, Jack, and the alien stood before a massive control panel, watching as the systems slowly powered up. We don't have long, Zana muttered. The Syndral Collective will be back soon, and when they come, they'll bring their entire fleet. The alien nodded. The base's defenses are strong, but it will take time to fully activate them. We'll need to hold off the initial attack. Jack cracked his knuckles, a determined look on his face. We've done it before. We'll do it again. Zana placed a hand on his shoulder. This time, it's different. This time, it's all or nothing. The tension in the air was palpable as the crew prepared for the final stand. Outside, the Syndral fleet was already approaching, their ships blotting out the stars. The battle that would determine the fate of humanity, and possibly the galaxy, was about to begin. As the first wave of Syndral ships entered the range of the base's defenses, the air crackled with energy. The ancient technology roared to life, firing beams of concentrated power at the enemy ships. Explosions lit up the sky as the Syndral forces were decimated, but more kept coming. Zana stood at the command center, her voice steady as she directed the crew. Focus all firepower on their lead ships. If we can break their formation, we can buy ourselves more time. The base's defenses fired relentlessly, but the Syndral collective was relentless, sending wave after wave of ships. The base's shields held, but just barely. We can't hold them off forever, Orin warned, his face pale with exhaustion. Zana's eyes blazed with determination. We don't need to hold them forever, just long enough to finish this. The alien stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the horizon. There's one more thing. The core of this base holds a weapon powerful enough to destroy the entire Syndral fleet, but activating it requires a sacrifice. Zana's heart skipped a beat. What kind of sacrifice? The alien's voice was quiet, almost sorrowful. It requires a life. Living mind to interface with the system. Once the weapon is activated, there's no coming back. A heavy silence fell over the room as the weight of the alien's words sank in. Jack stepped forward, his voice quiet but firm. If it's the only way, I'll do it. Zana's eyes widened in shock. No, Jack. I'm not losing you. We'll find another way. Jack shook his head, his expression resolute. There's no other way, Zana. If we don't stop them here, they'll wipe out humanity. I can't let that happen. Tears welled in Zana's eyes, but she nodded, knowing in her heart that Jack was right. You've always been the brave one. Jack smiled softly. And you've always been the one worth fighting for. With a final, bittersweet look, Jack stepped into the chamber at the heart of the base. The alien began the activation sequence, and the room filled with a brilliant light as Jack's consciousness merged with the ancient system. Outside, the Syndral fleet pressed closer, their ships firing relentlessly at the base. But just as all seemed lost, a massive surge of energy erupted from the core, engulfing the enemy fleet in a blinding wave of destruction. The Syndral ships disintegrated, one by one, until the sky was clear once more. The battle was over. Zana stood in the control room, staring at the empty chamber where Jack had once stood. Tears streamed down her face, but she stood tall, knowing that his sacrifice had saved them all. The alien approached her, his voice gentle. He gave his life for your people. His name will be remembered. Zana nodded, her voice choked with emotion. He was a hero. The crew of the Vortex Reaver gathered around her, their faces a mix of grief and relief. They had survived the impossible, but the cost had been great. As the stars twinkled above them, Zana knew that humanity had been given a second chance. They had fought back against the darkness, and they had won. But the fight was far from over. The Syndral collective was weakened, but not defeated, and as long as they still existed, humanity would remain a target. Zana wiped the tears from her eyes and turned to her crew. We've lost too much to give up now. We'll rebuild, we'll fight, and we'll make sure the Syndral collective never threatens us again. The crew nodded, their expressions filled with determination. Together, they had faced the impossible, and together, they would forge a future for humanity. As the Vortex Reaver lifted off once more, Zana glanced at the stars, her heart heavy with loss but filled with hope. They had survived the battle. Now, they would win the war.